Thank you very much. Participants may return to their seats. We would like to invite Dr. Lawrence Haddad and Professor Dr. Badil Hegar to the front. For this session, we would like to invite Prof. Dr. Badil Hegar to give an appreciation packet for Dr. Lawrence Haddad from GAIN. For the committee, we will invite for a photo session for this moment. Thank you very much, Prof. Badil Hegar and Dr. Lawrence Haddad. Without further ado, we welcome to the stage Dr. Lawrence Haddad as the Executive Director of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition to present a lecture on updates on global nutrition and food system actions to accelerate the progress on nutrition and health, lesson learned for Indonesia. This session will be moderated by Dr. Rina Agustina, Masters of Science, Universitas Indonesia, and currently serves as the head of Human Nutrition Research Center at IMERI FKUI. She is one of EAT Lancet Commissioners for Healthy Diet and Sustainable Food System, an ambassador for FOLU, a member of the steering committee for Standing Together for Nutrition Consortium, and a member of the technical advisory group for the New York Academy of Science, and the vice president of the Indonesian Medical Nutrition Association, or PDGMI. She is the lead author for the Lancet paper on universal health coverage in Indonesia and holds a PhD in human nutrition from Wageningen University in the Netherlands. To Dr. Rina, the floor is yours.
Okay, very good morning, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome, Professor Lawrence Haddad. And also, I would like to welcome also to our collaborator today. Of course, all the members from GAIN, the Global Alliance, and also from the IFG, and all the students, and also from the study program on nutrition, doctorate, and also master program. So we are very fortunate today to have you and to discuss about very important topic, very timely, especially because Indonesia is having a problem of triple burden of malnutrition. But at the same time, we have so many potential of the human resources, also potential for the biodiversity, and also we have an opportunity actually to lead the world, because all the potential improvement in Indonesia will also change the world. So here today we will discuss with Professor Lawrence. Here I would like to read the curriculum vitae before he gave a lecture. So please turn on the, yeah, okay. So Professor Lawrence Haddad, of course you can introduce yourself more as the Executive Director of Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. Of course we are very lucky because he's also a prize winner, a food prize winner, the World Food Prize winner laureate, and we will hear how can he get that laureate. So that would be good to also learn from him the achievement he made. He was the director of Institute Development Study before, and also director of International Food Policy Research Institute, and the UK representative on the steering committee of high-level panel of expert, the UN Committee on Food Security in Food Research at Stanford University in 1988. As mentioned earlier, he was awarded as a World Food Prize for his excellent talk on relentless leadership and advocacy and mobilizing political will to nutrition, the point of development strategy. He will discuss about the updates on global nutrition and food system, action to accelerate the progress on nutrition and health, lesson learned for Indonesia. So without further ado, the time is yours. Over to you, Professor Lawrence. Yeah. So would like to discuss there or? Yeah, okay.
So let me first of all thank Dr. Badrul for a very nice introduction to our session. He got all the key points exactly right. Malnutrition is something that everyone needs to be involved in. You need a big coalition of actors to make sure we can reduce malnutrition. Government, business, civil society, researchers, everyone needs to come together, because malnutrition is too big an issue for government alone to solve. And I'd like to thank Dr. Rina Agustina. She is one of your superstars on a global stage. It's great. I'm working with her on the Eat Lancet Commission #2. She was on the Eat Lancet Commission #1. And you should all be very proud of her. Colleagues, I just ask for silence while I'm speaking, okay? Because I can't, I'm getting, you saw when my PhD was, 1988, I'm getting old. I can't focus on my talk as well if there's talking there, so thank you. First of all, thank you for coming so early in the morning to hear me. And thank you to Emery for organizing this. And thank you to my colleague Agnes Malipu. Agnes is the director of the office here, GAIN office here in Jakarta. And thank you for organizing this week for me, Agnes. I want to talk to you about food systems and nutrition. You may think this is an odd topic to be talking about in a medical school. This is a medical school. Why am I talking about food systems? You'll find out that food, if you don't know already, food is the major driver of ill health. In Indonesia, please, I can't, if you speak, I can't focus. Thanks. Food is the major driver of ill health in Indonesia and everywhere else. I come from the UK. Some of the stats I'm going to show you today, you could find them in the UK as well. Obesity, not enough micronutrients, too much salt, too much sugar, too much cholesterol. These are driving premature mortality numbers. They're driving morbidity numbers. They're filling up the health system in your country, in my country, with lots of people who don't need to be there if they had better diets. So the question is, how do we improve diets? So this is what I'm going to talk to you about today. What is a food system? Why do they need to be healthier? How can they be healthier? But really critically, how do we actually make them healthier? There's lots of people who talk about it, but no one actually, not enough people actually do something about it. So how do we actually do something about it? And I'll give you some take-home messages. So this is a pretty complicated diagram. And by the way, Dr. Rina, I hope my slides can be shared with everyone. This is a pretty complicated diagram, but basically a food system is everything that connects all the choices that connect food production. So farmers, what they decide what to grow, how to grow it, where to grow it, all the way through to diets. And then diets is one key input into nutrition outcomes. But there's lots of decisions in between. How do we process the food? How do we store it? How do we transport it? How do we market it? How do we advertise it? How do we prepare it? How do we store it in the home? What are the serving sizes? How is it cooked? These are all these decisions are part of the food system, and all of them have big implications for nutrition. What's the problem we're trying to solve? So these are global numbers. We know globally there's about 768 million people that are hungry. We know that there's about 1.5 billion people who globally who cannot afford a nutrient adequate diet. This is a diet that meets all the minimum requirements, the carbohydrates, proteins, vitamins, minerals, fiber. And we also know that there are 3 billion people who cannot afford a healthy diet. So a healthy diet goes beyond a minimally nutrition adequate diet. It goes into culture and the kinds of foods people want to eat, not the foods they have to eat to make their nutrition good. So we have a big problem. 3 billion people worldwide can't afford a healthy diet. That's 3 billion out of nearly 8 billion. And in Indonesia, I bet that number is, Rina probably knows it more than me, that number is probably 50% of Indonesians cannot afford a healthy diet. And in addition, because food is not just about nutrition, the food decisions we make affect the environment, climate, greenhouse gas emissions, they affect biodiversity. Indonesia is a leader in this field, and so food systems are important for human health and for planetary health. And at the middle of all of these different forms of malnutrition, the government of Indonesia has put stunting very high on its list. Stunting is when, and forgive me if you know this, it's when you see a child this height and you think the child might be 5 years old, but they're actually 8 or 9 years old. They're stunted and they look normal. but they're much older than you think they are because their height and everything that's a marker, height is a marker. It's an indicator of cognitive development, immune system development, all of these different functional consequences. We don't really care about height on its own, unless you're going to become a basketball player, but we care about height because it's an indicator of lots of things we do really care about. So at the center of stunting, anemia rates are rising in Indonesia. At the center of stunting, anemia, overweight, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, wasting. Wasting is children that are very thin. You can see their bones through their skin. At the center of all of these is poor diets. It's not the only thing that drives malnutrition. We know that in stunting, it's poor food, it's poor healthcare, it's poor water, poor sanitation, all of these things combined. But at the center of all of these types of malnutrition are poor diets. Now, this is data from the Global Burden of Disease studies. Now, the Global Burden of Disease studies, they take all the premature mortality data in the world, they take all the morbidity data in the world, and they put them together in one indicator called the burden of disease or disability adjusted life years, DALYs. Then the researchers who compile all these data, they then say, what are the factors that are driving the burden of disease? What's causing these burden of disease? These are the top 10 factors globally, right? So you can see tobacco is there, alcohol use is there, drug use is there, occupational risks, which are work-related risks. Air pollution is there. These are global numbers, remember. But the ones I've colored in dark red, they're all related to diet, right? What we eat. Child and maternal malnutrition, dietary risks, high blood pressure from too much salt, high total cholesterol, high body mass index, which is being overweight or obese, high fasting plasma glucose is when you consume too much added sugar in sugary drinks and that kind of thing. So you can see 6 out of the top 10 risk factors globally are diet related. So our diets are literally killing us and making us ill. What do these numbers look like for Indonesia? So here are the numbers for Indonesia. I'm sorry if you can't see that very easily, but it's the same picture as the one I just showed you globally. These are the top 10 risk factors for Indonesian burden of disease. This is Indonesian premature mortality and Indonesian morbidity from all types of factors. And you can see the ones I've highlighted in red are the diet-related ones. So the top one is high blood pressure in 2019. You can see in 2009, it was number 2. Now it's become number 1. You can see that air pollution has gone down from 4 to 7. And you can see that malnutrition, which is really undernutrition, not enough of the right kinds of foods, that's gone down from 1 to 6. So malnutrition, the classic undernutrition, has gone down from 1 to 6. But the dietary risks, number 5 through, has gone from 5 to 3. Dietary risks are things around diabetes, hypertension, overweight, obesity. So we've got all of them there. Diet is core to all of those. So in Indonesia, diet is central to overcoming all forms of malnutrition. How is Indonesia doing when it comes to meeting global targets? So I've taken these numbers from the Global Nutrition Report, which comes out every 2 years, and it assesses every country against the global targets. So each one of these boxes is an outcome, a nutrition outcome. You can see stunting, anemia, low birth weight, overweight, breastfeeding, all the way through to diabetes. The only indicator out of these 11 indicators that Indonesia is on track for is this one in green, the exclusive breastfeeding one. Exclusive breastfeeding is very important. Exclusive breastfeeding means breastfeeding breast milk only for the first 6 months of life. The coverage rates are improving really well, which is really good news. However, the ones in yellow, they're not doing as well. There's some progress, that's good, but not fast enough to meet the targets. So stunting is coming down. Low birth weight, the incidence of low birth weight is coming down, and childhood wasting is coming down, but just not fast enough to meet these targets. However, the ones in red, there's no progress, or actually it's getting worse. And these are the ones that are actually, every country in the world is struggling with how to deal with these. It's not just Indonesia. And the one I'm really worried about is anemia. I mean, I'm worried about all of them, but anemia is really worrying because it's one of those conditions that's very debilitating. It affects women much more than men. It requires the health system, the food system, and the environment system to work together. It's difficult. But so Indonesia, you know, there's some bright spots, there's some progress, but in general, there's big problems. I'll skip this one. Now, where does GAIN come in? We're actually a very small NGO. We're only about 300 people globally. We have offices in 10 countries. Indonesia is one of them. And this is our purpose. We're an international NGO, a civil society group. And our rationale is to focus on making nutritious and safe food more available. So it's in the market or in the shop, more affordable. It's in the shop and in the market, and I can actually afford it to buy it, and more desirable. It may be in the market, it may be in the store. I can afford it. It's nutritious and safe, but you know what? I don't like it very much. It's not very attractive, so I'm not going to eat it. So we try to work on all three of those aspects. We're really unusual, I think, as an organization, because we are right at the center of, we connect food systems with nutrition. There are plenty of people who focus on nutrition, but don't think about food systems. And there are plenty of people that focus on food systems, but don't think about nutrition. So we try to connect those two groups. And then we think the public sector has to be in the lead when it comes to reducing malnutrition. But because we work in food systems, and food systems are driven by the private sector, farmers are part of the private sector, processors, storage companies, marketers, advertisers, retail outlets, they're all the private sector. So we have to work with the private sector, and we have to bring them together. So the question then is, how do we make this food system, how do we make these food systems more nutritious? How do we do that? We clearly need to, but how do we do it? Well, there's lots of different ways of doing it. In the food supply chains, for example, we could, most governments spend a lot of money on research and development in agriculture, but it tends to go on the staple foods, rice, for example, here. It very rarely will go on how do we improve the productivity or the climate resilience of vegetables or beans. And these foods are very rich in nutrients. So that's one example. Another example is to reduce food loss. How can we find low-cost ways of refrigerating foods or preserving foods that are, and remember, the most perishable foods, the foods that spoil the quickest, tend to be the ones that have the most micronutrients in them, the fresh foods. Fish and vegetables and fruits, they deteriorate very quickly. What can we do to improve them? How can we fortify food and biofortified food? Can we find crops that are rich naturally in zinc and iron and retinol? In the food environment space, what can we do to support small and medium enterprises, SMEs, small and medium enterprises, not the big companies, not the Indo Foods of this world, but the small and medium enterprises, the businesses that have 5 employees or 50 employees. And why is that? Why are they important? They're important because that's where most people at risk of malnutrition get their food from. They get their food from small and medium enterprises. What can we do to support small and medium enterprises? How can we get workforce nutrition? Most people spend a big chunk of their lives working in a workplace. How can we make workplaces more supportive of nutrition? If you work in a factory and there's nowhere for you to breastfeed your baby, you're not going to breastfeed your baby. If you work in a rural setting where there's not very good food around you, the food isn't good provided to the workers, your malnutrition will suffer. And clear food labeling is obviously key. On food advertisements, I'm going to show you a couple of examples of where most governments have health promotion campaigns for foods, but most governments do it very badly. It's very science-based, and there's nothing wrong with that, of course. It has to be science-based, but it doesn't go much beyond that. And when you look at the private sector is brilliant at selling us things we don't actually need and don't even know we want until they tell us we want them. And then we think, oh, I must have that. And that's because they key into our aspirations, they key into our emotions. If we want to convince people to do more, to buy more healthy foods, we have to also do those kinds of things. So I'm going to give you 6 examples of things I think we need to do. And this is what GAIN tries hard to do to get our food systems to be more nutritious. So the first one is to wake up governments to healthy diets. A lot of governments don't think healthy diets are important. Now that's changing. And I think the UN Food System Summit that happened last year was a big part of that. This big UN Food System Summit, Indonesia was a very active participant. Every one of the governments that participated was asked to produce a food system transformation plan. And the Indonesian government did produce one. And this piece of analysis was done, and it looked at all of these 111 national food system pathways that were produced by these 111 countries. And it said how many of them was healthy diets mentioned. Because a food system pathway doesn't have to mention healthy diets. It could focus on biodiversity, it could focus on climate change, it could focus on jobs. But 91% of them said healthy diets from sustainable food systems is the #1 priority. So that's good. Governments are already actively engaged. This is too detailed to talk about here, but I wanted to show it to you because this is your government's national pathway. And this is what the Indonesian government says: improved diets, fortification and biofortification, better governance, inclusive business. And I've highlighted the text I've highlighted in orange is the other things that GAIN and our partners work on. So, and I'll mention several of those, but I think this is a very good plan that the government of Indonesia has put together. The challenge now will be to implement it. And we at GAIN will be one of these organizations supporting the government to implement it. Now, here's an example from Bangladesh of how to get the attention of the government on healthy diets and food systems. This is a pledge that the Bangladesh office at the GAIN Bangladesh office, together with our Bangladeshi partners, we said, we want to mobilize youth, or we want to mobilize adolescents, because adolescents, if we can get adolescents eating well, this is when a lot of food preferences are formed. So if we can get adolescents eating well, they're pretty likely to eat well for the rest of their lives. And businesses really care about adolescents, because if you can get an adolescent to buy your stuff when they're 17, 18, They're probably going to buy your stuff for the next 30 or 40 years. Governments also care about adolescents because they're going to become voters pretty soon. So this is a very powerful group, adolescents. Their potential for change is powerful. So we said, and we worked with a whole network of schools and community and youth groups in Bangladesh to get 1 million signatures from 1 million Bangladeshi adolescents. They took a pledge, they signed a pledge and they said, we will spend our tiny pocket money on healthy food outside our schools, because they couldn't get any healthy food outside their schools. It was just junk food. We will spend our tiny pocket money on healthy foods if you, the government, and if you businesses make it easier for us to do that, then we will do it. And so this pledge has been signed by over 1 million. It's become a powerful group. The government is paying attention to this group. Businesses are paying attention to this group. It's a way of getting attention. Next thing, shift consumer preferences. Consumers are powerful. We work with businesses and we say to businesses, why are you producing such unhealthy food? The businesses will say to us, it's because that's what consumers want. Now, I kind of take this with a grain of salt, because we know that businesses are very good at shaping consumer preferences. But we also need to help shape consumer preferences. So how do we do that? So here's an example from Australia. On the left, go for 2 + 5. So this is 2 fruits and 5 vegetables a day. This is their campaign. Now, I don't know about you, but this doesn't get me very excited, this poster. It doesn't make me want to go out and eat 5 vegetables and 2 fruits. I think it's very boring, very uninspiring, and it's not going to get me to pay attention. Look at the example on the right. This is from, I can't remember where this is from, but it's advertising pretzels that are thin pretzels and covered in chocolate. And notice it doesn't even mention the word pretzels or chocolate. It just says you can never be too thin. So what's really clever about this ad is it's linking into something that consumers care about, being thinner, and it's implicitly linking, subliminally linking my desire to be thinner and consumption of these thin pretzels covered in chocolate. Eat more of these pretzels. You want to be thinner? Eat more of these chocolate covered pretzels, which when you think about it is kind of crazy, right? But when you make food decisions, you're often not thinking much, you're just reacting. Your emotions are guiding your choices. And we need to do a bit more of this for healthy foods, not for unhealthy foods. So this is some of our work in Kenya, our Kenya office. They developed a campaign around healthy foods, and it's called This Is What Made Me. And they did some research with Kenyan consumers, with Kenyan marketing agencies, and it turns out that young people in Kenya obviously, like everywhere, want to be doctors and lawyers and teachers and nurses, and they want to be artists and musicians. So we found these folks in these professions, especially ones who had come from very humble beginnings, and we made a campaign around them. So these are, in Kenya, these are famous people in the middle of these pictures. And on the left, you see, it's called This Is What Made Me. The implication is that these foods helped me become who I am today. So the foods are listed on the right, the healthy foods, and the pictures of young children eating these foods. And the implication is, if you want to be like your heroes, you should start eating healthier foods at a very early age. And it's really targeted towards parents. So that's an example. Third thing to do is to build employee awareness and activism. I mentioned earlier, workers are very important for businesses, obviously, but businesses are also very important for workers' nutrition. We know, and what am I talking about? What is workforce nutrition? you may not have heard about this or thought about this much, but every employer provides an environment for their worker, and every employer, so Gain is an employer, we have it's called a duty of care to our employees, people who work for us. Every employer has a duty of care. Why isn't nutrition part of that duty of care? It should be. And so we are working with lots of employers to say, how can we get healthier food at work? How can we do nutrition education in the workplace? How can we have nutrition-focused health checks for workers, whether they're in a tea plantation, in a garment factory, or at Google.com? We work with Google.com on this as well. And then how can we do breastfeeding support? When I was in Bangladesh in April, I went to a big wet market where Gain and Bangladeshi partners have set up a breastfeeding station for vendors. The vendors in the big market who have young children can go and have a safe breastfeeding space. And this is actually quite an easy thing to convince employers to do. You might think employers are thinking, oh God, it's just one more thing I have to do. It's just one more expense. You're telling me I've got to do this for my workers, and now I've got to do these things for my workers as well. But if you look at the economics of it, it's very strong for an employer. The returns on an investment for every rupiah or every 100,000 rupiah spent on a workforce nutrition program by an employer, you'll get 6 back. For every 1 you spend, you get 6 back. And why is that? That's because the workers are more present. They don't take sick days. And they're not absent. Their productivity is higher. They can do more things. And fewer accidents. So this really hits the bottom line of employers, as well as being very good for employees. That's very important. And this is a program this is actually an event we're going to have later this week, tomorrow, with the Indonesian banking sector. We're trying to get the banking sector in Indonesia to do more for its employees in the workforce. You might think, why banking sector? We're hoping that the banking sector can really understand the economic benefits of doing this. If we want nutrition to become higher on the political agenda, we have to make it an economic issue as well as a health issue. The fourth thing to do is to build investor awareness. Companies are looking for investors. Businesses are looking for investors. Some investors are looking to invest in companies that are doing good things for nutrition. They're called activist investors or purpose-driven investors. How can we support them? Well, this is an example of Gain's work in Indonesia. This is something called iPlan. It was reducing post-harvest loss in fish in Indonesia. Post-capture loss of fish in every country, including Indonesia, is very high. Fish are very perishable. If you don't take care of if you don't freeze them and preserve them quickly, they deteriorate, they become unsafe, and then you have to throw them away. So we developed a whole series of activities, but at the core of the activities was looking for businesses that were really generating innovative solutions, and then getting support to those businesses, getting finance to them, getting technical assistance to them, helping them promote what they were doing. So some of the ones, here are 4 of the examples. First one is a refreezable plastic ice pack, which is very low tech, actually. You think it's low tech, but actually quite difficult to do on an economic basis. A fish storage and display unit for motorbikes for last mile sellers. So they can, on motorbikes, they can get fish to where it's needed to get to. And then a cooling attachment towed by a three-wheeler motorbikes to maintain cold chain. So the reason I'm investors are looking for companies that are doing the right thing for nutrition. We need to help investors find those companies. And these kinds of competitions are really important to help investors say, oh, these 4 companies are doing great things. I'm an investor. I want to invest in businesses that are socially responsible. I'm going to invest in them. We also need to develop new finance mechanisms. Now, this is going to sound very far removed from nutrition, right? But again, you know, those small companies I mentioned, we can run competitions, we can help, we can raise the profile of these companies for potential investors. But sometimes these companies are too small. They're too small for the formal sector. They'll go to a big bank in Jakarta and the bank will say, you know, you've only got 10 employees. It's not worth our while to give you a loan. It's too much effort. I'd rather give a loan to a company that has 100,000 employees because it's the same level of effort to give you them a loan as it is to give you a loan, and their loan will be much bigger than your loan. So me as a bank, I'll make a lot more money giving a loan to a big company than giving a loan to a small company. So we need to find mechanisms that are geared for those medium-sized and small companies. And impact investing is a big industry. It's a group of investors who say, we want to invest in companies that have a social impact investing. And it's a big industry. It's $131 billion worldwide at the moment. But only 8 billion of that 131 goes to Southeast Asia. I couldn't get the numbers for Indonesia, but for the region I can. Only 8 billion of the 131 goes to Southeast Asia. And only 1 billion of that 8 billion goes to food and agriculture. Now, even that isn't enough because food and agriculture isn't, you can produce non-foods, right? Cotton, jute, rubber, these are non-foods that the agricultural sector produces. And then even if it is a food, it might be a food that's produced for export. So what's the percentage of that 131 billion that's going to Southeast Asia for nutritious foods that are consumed domestically in Indonesia or in Southeast? We don't know the number. We're just guessing. 200 million. It's a guess. 200 million out of 131 billion. That's not good enough. So we again we're developing something called a nutritious food finance facility. It's a small impact fund designed to help small and medium enterprises get the credit. We're not giving them money, we're loaning them money. We're loaning them money. So we have to raise the money and then we can loan it to them and then they repay it to us. But that's small, it's going to be $60 million. We need hundreds of those. Then my final point is about data and evidence. We need better data and evidence to transform food systems. So this is something that we set up again with FAO and with Johns Hopkins University and a bunch of other organizations back in 2020. We were trying to do some work at GAIN. I joined GAIN in 2016. We were trying to do some work at GAIN in 2017. And I said to all of the country directors like Agnes and others, can we pull together all the data on food systems? And they said, no, it's too difficult. I have to go to 30 different places. I have to find food production data over here. I have to find food storage data over here. I have to find diets over here. Find diets for adults over here, diets for kid over here. Advertising data is over here. Some data I can't even get because it's privately held. So we said, let's try and put it all in one place. Let's create a dashboard for food system data. So we created this thing. If you haven't seen it, please do go ahead and look at it. That's the address, foodsystemdashboard.org. All the data is publicly available. There's 200 indicators for each country. So for Indonesia, there are 200 indicators that go all the way from food production all the way through to nutrition outcomes and everything in between. And the people at Google really like this food system dashboard. They're always going raving about how important it is. The thing that's nice about the dashboard is it describes your food system. So this is what it looks like. Most policymakers don't really know what their food system looks like because they only ever see a small part of it. If you're in the Ministry of Agriculture, you pretty much only ever see the food supply part. You don't see anything else. If you're in the Ministry of Health, you might see the diets part, but you don't see the production part. So it describes your food system. It then diagnoses the food system, which bits of your food system are performing well, which bits are not. And then it helps you decide what to do about it. So describe, diagnose, and decide. So we're currently working with Bapanas, and we have a session with them on Friday this week. We're working with Bapanas on a dashboard for Indonesia. The one I showed you was a global dashboard. This is an Indonesia one where you have the data are available at these subunits at the Regency and city level. So for every Regency and city, you'll have 200 indicators that describe the food system. And I think this will be tremendously helpful for local authorities to make decisions about food systems. So all of this stuff is really important. In addition to diets, we've got to do all of this in a way that's environmentally responsible, because the food choices we make, if we consume too many animal source foods, too much beef, that's not good for the environment. But if we consume too little beef, or too few animal source foods, that's not good for nutrition, for very young children and women of reproductive age. So we have to be really nuanced about environment. And there are lots of different things we've got to worry about. We've got to worry about greenhouse gas emissions. And this graph shows you the different greenhouse gas emissions for different types of food. So animal products have a big greenhouse gas emission, right? That's the brown part of the column. But there are other dimensions of environmental concern: cropland use, blue water use, nitrogen, and phosphorus. And different foods have different implications for different environmental dimensions. So this is really complicated. And the dashboard I mentioned earlier has environment data in it as well. So these are my take-home messages. Current food systems everywhere, and I always say this, no country has a monopoly on the problem of food systems, and no country has a monopoly on the solutions. It's as our host said, everyone has a problem and everyone can contribute to the solution. So we have to share solutions with countries. They're really bad for human health and they're bad for planetary health, and they need to be transformed. There is no one thing that needs to happen. I do lots of interviews with journalists, and the journalists say, what's the one thing we need to do to transform food systems? And I'll always say to them, the one thing we need to do is to stop asking, what is the one thing we need to do? Because there's no one thing. You have to act it's a system, so you have to act in lots of different areas. A set of things have to happen. I've given you 6 types of things that need to happen. And they require technical soundness. They have to be science-based, but they have to be political. You have to get the politicians to buy into them. The most sensible thing technically, there may be no appetite for the politicians to do it. So what do? Do we go off and sulk? No. We find things that they want to do that are also technically sound. They may not be the #1 priority or the #2 priority, but they can get done. So we have to be pragmatic and practical. The data are needed to track and analyze. I think there's a big research agenda for researchers out there. How do we shift healthy diets? How do we construct campaigns that are compelling and make people sit up and pay attention and turn the light bulbs on? How do we do that? There's also a big health and environment research agenda. These foods are good for human health, but they're terrible for the environment. The private sector is crucial to engage, but we mustn't do it, we must do it carefully, because the private sector is a big part of the problem here, but they have to be a big part of the solution. So how do we do that? And that's a research question as well. And then finally, we are ready to support all stakeholders for food system tracking. Sorry, that says India, it should say Indonesia. I was having a brain freeze in Indonesia. So thank you so much. Sorry I went on so long.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lawrence. Please have another applause for Dr. Lawrence. It's really nice that we learned about what's the problem in Indonesia and the world, and what progress has been made. At the same time, also, it's a good explanation on how can we translate it into the unhealthy diet to the more nutritious one with so many comprehensive action-oriented pathway. So I think we learned a lot of other things, like inviting how we can wake up the commitment of the political people, and also how we can do the shifting of the preference, and a lot of action related to campaign, and invite the youth, the adolescent to also act. And very interestingly, that you invite all the private sectors to also work together, as well as the other data related action. So that's very comprehensive. So I think that we already have a lot of questions to you. And this is all the young that you are talking about, the youth that will be our future. Yeah, they are the one who will be actually facing the food system in the world, globally, nationally. They're also the one who will act for the individual and also for the nation. Okay, so Devi, I understand we have so many questions, and we will open for, we'll present. Yeah, but before we go for that, we would like to ask audience first. Before we go from the online questions, we will invite the audience first to ask question. Yeah, we already have an online one. We will keep it for now, but we will invite the students and the lecturer from the audience. Yeah. Okay, so we will open 3 questions. Yeah, 3 questions. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Someone wants to ask?
Don't be shy. I'm actually terrified at your questions.
Okay, speakers Pertama Dika. Before I wanna say thank you very much for information you have explained to us. Okay, same the same action to accelerate the progress on nutrition and health. I wanna ask. In fact, the government, especially in Indonesia, has issued many programs that strongly support the acceleration of nutrition and health. But there are still many nutritional problems in Indonesia. One of them may be due to personal awareness. Okay, my question, how we as health workers to help awaken the person? Because with counseling, many times it doesn't work for that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for a good question. I mean, I think malnutrition is one of the hardest things to reduce. It's really difficult because there are so many things that are driving poor nutrition. I think your question is how do we get people to make better choices? I think that was essentially what you were saying. And so I think the question, I think that's a really important question, But I think we as professionals are too complacent, a bit lazy about how we communicate about nutrition. I've done a lot of work in India, not so much in Indonesia, and community health workers in India routinely tell me, oh, people don't understand what we're saying. They're ignorant, they're illiterate. And I say to the community health workers, well, then you need to find a different way of communicating with people, because actually they're not stupid. If you're not finding a way to communicate effectively, you need to look at yourself and say, how do I do it better? So I think this is what I was trying to get at in my talk about find out if there's a group that you want to change behavior, find out what it is that's going to make them come alive, make them flip the switch. In GAIN and the government of Indonesia, we had this big program called Baduta in East Java, right? In East Java. Yes. And it was all about behavior change. And one of the, behavior change for mothers and their very young children. And one of the things we did was to use emotion. So the mothers would, for example, the mothers would be sitting around in the community health center in the rural area. I think it was in Surabaya, right? Yeah. And they would get like a cheese puff or potato chip. You could buy in the community, you could buy it. It's cheap. It's got nice wrapping. The kids love it. It's tasty. It looks great. You get this potato chip or this cheese puff, and you dissolve it in a cup of water. The mothers see the grease on the water. They smell the bad smell that comes off from the potato chip or the puff that's being dissolved in water, and it generates an emotional response. And they remember that response. It's so much more effective than somebody holding up a potato chip and saying, this is bad for you, which is a lot of the time, this is the kind of communication. So I think we have to be really creative about how we get through to people, because it's not good enough. I'm not saying that you're doing this at all, sir, but many community health workers I know just, they communicate in ways they understand, but not in the ways that the audience understands. I'll try and make my answers shorter.
Hello, I'm Alfie from a research coordinator in HNRC. I have a question about as a young scientist, how do you have any idea how we can contribute to our community and also our government healthy program? Because as we know, in most of our community, as long as they thought that as long as the food is enough for them. So how we can, as a young scientist, to contribute to our government program for the healthy diet?
How can you contribute to the
Yeah.
to the program? Thank you for the question. It's a good question. I mean, I think as a scientist, you can. When I was your age, I think, or at your stage in your career, I did a research. I was living in the United States at the time, and I did a research project for my master's dissertation, which was looking at. They had a program. They had a program in the US that was giving healthy foods to women and infants, but they couldn't figure out why not enough women and infants were using the service because the food was free. and they couldn't figure out why there wasn't more uptake of it. So we did a study. I did a study. That was my question. That was the question I was answering. And in the end, it turned out to be very straightforward. The opening hours of the clinics were 9 to 5, and most women are working, and they couldn't use it. The outreach that they were doing was in English, whereas most of their audience spoke Spanish. So it's this kind of really basic stuff that was, and my advice to you is to find a government program that you think is not working very well and do some research on it. And it doesn't have to be a big fancy piece of research. It can be quite small and targeted. Talk to people who are using the program, talk to the people who are delivering the program, find out what's working and what's not working, do a study on it, and report it back to people like Dr. Rina and Dr. Badril, because they know people in government. They can get the research. Most governments will welcome evidence about how well their programs are working because they want to make them better, especially if it doesn't cost. Usually the improvements don't require a lot of money. They're usually very simple things to change, actually. So my advice would be do research on these programs. See how they're working, how they're not working. When you design a program, when you're part of government, you design something that you think should work. And when you design it, it's the same at GAIN. When we design programs, we design them, and on paper, they look great. And they will work if everything works. But if one thing doesn't work in real life, the program will break down. So any advice you can give them on, you think it's working this way, but it's really working that way, I think that's great. It's great for your research, and it's great for government, and ultimately it's great for the people that are supposed to be using the program.
Thank you, Professor Lawrence. Actually, Alfie is now leading one of the big research about pre-diabetes, about 700 people all over Jakarta. So it's already way forward for you, yeah? Okay. Thank you, Lawrence. So we have a question from the online, yeah? Here from Ferdi UI. Would like to read that. Generally, the image of healthy diet, nutrition is close to luxuriousness, especially to mid-low in economic groups. What is your opinion to that stigma, and how do we make it approachable to them? On workforce healthy nutrition program, mostly it was already applied in a big company who have specific concern for that. How do we manage to a smaller company? Okay. Over to you.
Yeah, good questions. Thank you. And I must say, all of the questions here have been great, and these are good questions too. So thank you. I share the concern about the term healthy diets in the first question. It does kind of imply. It does kind of imply a kind of a Western middle income preoccupation. You know, I don't like some of the terms that are used, alternative proteins. I don't like that term very much. It seems very, it seems like a concern of an elite group. So I think the term healthy diet is difficult, and we wrestle with it a lot again. We end up saying our goal is to improve the consumption of safe and nutritious foods because we think that will contribute to whatever a healthy diet is. But you don't have to have a lot of income to do this. In our work in Tanzania, we are working with local business, small local businesses to convert a green leafy vegetable in Tanzania into an attractive product, because in Tanzania, not enough people consume vegetables. They're very expensive, the ones you can buy in the markets. And yet everywhere, if you go walk around rural areas in Indonesia, there's this green leafy vegetable that's everywhere. It's edible, it's packed with micronutrients, it's available, it grows easily. And you ask people, why don't people eat this? And they say it's goat's food. It's food for goats, not food for humans. But 30 years ago, their grandparents were consuming this food. So foods become unfashionable, healthy foods that are readily available and cheap. So how can we make healthy foods that are available and affordable? How can we make them desirable? So it doesn't have to be all about income. Healthy food is not all about income. It can also be about preferences. And then even when it is about income, it could be, again, I work a lot in India, trying to get, in India has the biggest public distribution food system in the world. It's 1.4 billion people in India. The government buys lots of food for their social safety net programs. And Indonesia has big social safety net programs too. But the government of India tends to focus on rice and wheat for its safety net programs. Some states finally are beginning to purchase pulses, beans and peas, millets. The pulses are very affordable and very packed with micronutrients and good quality proteins. So healthy diets don't have to be expensive. But I agree the term healthy diet is a little bit problematic. I think it's not a universal term, I think. So that's why we talk about improving the consumption of safe and nutritious foods. The second one is on workforce health nutrition. There's a really good point. And first of all, we don't do it with only very big companies. We do it with medium-sized companies. We do it with small garment factories in Dhaka in Bangladesh. But it's true, it's difficult to do it with companies that have 5 employees or 10 employees. And we don't have a good answer for you yet. We're working on it. We think the solution might be to, some of these small companies have associations and networks. We think the way to do it is to work with the networks, to support the networks to then support the SMEs. So some of you may have heard the Scaling Up Nutrition movement, the SUN movement. The SUN movement has a series of business networks. The business network in Indonesia, I think, is chaired by Indofood. But most of the members of the SUN business network in Indonesia are small and medium enterprises. So what can we do to support that network here to support the small and medium enterprises? A lot of the tools are available for small and medium enterprises, but they don't have the resources to use them. So that's a good question. I'm not giving any love to the audience over here.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Anna from UHAMKA Jakarta, Universitas Muhammadiyah, Professor Dr. Hamka. Yeah. Thank you for your great lecture today. Regarding a public health sector encouragement, I want to ask you a question. Maybe it is a technical question actually. How can, according your experience in your country, could you please tell us about how can we encourage the health sector, the private sector, for example, food outlet or maybe supermarket to have.
How can we help the private sector?
Food outlet.
I can't hear you. Like
Supermarket or maybe health outlet.
Big ones or small ones or both?
For small, yeah, small.
So big supermarkets?
Small scale.
Okay.
Actually, I have a sister. She is a manager of supermarket. I am a health promoter in my campus. I asked my sister to have a health promotion program in her supermarket, but it is quite difficult because we have to have an administration process to the office and so on and so on. Maybe could you please tell us about how can we encourage the supermarket to have a health promotion program in their outlet? Because for the academician, for us, for the scientists, it is sometimes difficult to reach the private sector. Maybe you can share the tips for us. Thank you very much.
Yeah, great question. Is it Anna? Great question, Anna. I think, again, when you're approaching the private sector, because you're right, the private sector is where most people buy their food from the private sector in one way or another. So if you want to get the private sector to do something different, you have to think about what do they care about? So they care about lots of things. They care about government regulations. They care about what their consumers think. They care about what their investors think. They care about what their employees think. And they care about their profile in the media. So I think you have to think about those 5 things. How can we use these 5 things in terms of carrots and sticks, positives and negatives? And usually I like to do the positives first. So I would talk to the supermarket manager and say, we think this is going to, what does the supermarket manager care about? Are they going to get more customers? We think this can help you get more customers if you do this. Cite some evidence from other countries that shows, and there is evidence. The other thing the supermarket manager might care about is the cost. How am I going to do this? And so you, as a research group, you could say, well, we'll cover the costs of helping set this up. And then another thing they'll care about is, how do I show my bosses this is actually improving sales? So you could offer to support their evaluation. So I think you have to talk to them and say, we know you might be, it's not your job actually as the private sector to improve public health. If you're, leave us alone. So first of all, are they breaking the law? You should find that out. If they're not, then you approach them and say, we actually think this could be good for your business. We think it could be good for your reputation. We think it could help make you stand out as a progressive company. We think this will help you attract employees. So think about all the things they care about and try and make the case that it's going to help them. But, and it's difficult, just as it's difficult to change nutrition behavior at the community level, it's difficult to change it at the policy level and at the business level. It's difficult, but you just got to keep doing it. I would say I will get a journalist to write a profile about what you're doing as a supermarket, how you're trying to do the right thing and trying to help. I would link it to youth groups. You could petition you could get the junk food away from the kids' eye level to the up here. There's all sorts of things you can do, and I think the thing is to talk to them, to find out what the things that you think might be blocking them may not be the things blocking them. Find out what the things that are blocking them from doing this and figure out if you can help unblock them.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rollins. Any other question from the audience? Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Dr. Lawrence, for your interesting presentation. My name is Norlaila Febriana. I'm a student in Universitas Indonesia. I'd like to ask, is there any recommendation from GAIN to the government about the improved use of local foods? Because I think that Indonesia have so much potential on the local food, but now it's no longer used as much as before because we mainly depend on rice. So I would like to know, is there any plan from GAIN to make that more seen by the government? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's got, when you work for an organization like GAIN, you have to be very careful not to, or any NGO, you have to be very careful not to preach to the government. So you have to, again, governments need to be persuaded to do things. So you have to kind of find the thing that we go about. And I think this government, rightly so, is really caring about the resilience of food systems. That how, if there's a shock, whether it's a COVID shock or a Ukraine, we don't see a food system that collapses under that. So I think this government, along with the G20, and remember the government is hosting the G20 in October, I think they care about it. And when you think of resilience, it's a very difficult concept. Find the kinds of foods, the kinds of crops, diversifying diets, diversifying biodiversity. So I think I would be looking at communicating. If you as a government of Indonesia are interested in the resilience of your food system, looking at local foods is a really important dimension of that, because local foods are often affordable and nutritious, they're culturally acceptable, they're just lacking investment. Remember, one of the slides had agricultural R&D, research and development. Most of that goes to rice. And you can kind of understand why, because rice is the major source of calories. If people don't get enough rice, there's, protests. And no governments the world over don't like protests. So they'll focus on that. But if they want a more resilient food system, crops, these orphan crops, sometimes they're called, underutilized crops that are nutritious and affordable, but just not in the limelight. They're not in the spotlight. So what can we do? So that's how I would sell it. I wouldn't sell it on a health basis. I would sell it on a resilience basis. Good question. See, nutrition's about politics a lot and about economics. It's about health and science. It's about economics and politics as well.
Thank you, Dr. Lawrence. We have more questions now from the online. So I will start with Dr. Helda Husun from Simia Rekfon. Yeah. Currently in Indonesia, there's a big shift in income allocation toward processed food. Food advertisement as part of food environment influence very much the decision of consumer to choose certain food, especially among adolescent and young adult. The food advertisement now also use social media, and this is very unregulated in Indonesia, perhaps. What is your view on regulating food advertisement in order to protect consumer from unhealthy food promotion, and how to go about it?
I think this is a great question, and it's a massive problem everywhere.
It's a real problem.
Every country. I'll tell you a bit about my country in the UK where I live, but I think there needs to be, remember I said carrots and sticks, so positive incentives and negative incentives. And I think businesses need both of these. I think there needs to be much more regulation in every country, whether that's the mainstream media, advertising on TV. There needs to be, they call them, what do they call them? Anyway, after 9 o'clock in the evening, before 9 o'clock in the evening in the UK, there's a ban on certain advertisements for certain foods. After 9 o'clock, after 9 p.m, you can advertise potato chips and all that sort of stuff. So I think children have to be protected from these advertisements. I also think schools need to be. I think schools can't have vending machines with lots of junk food in them. So I think that's another opportunity. So I think there's a lot of regulation that's needed. Social media is difficult. The schools, the mainstream media, much easier. So what do you do about social media? Well, I think here you have to find influencers, prominent influencers in the social media space that you can work with to promote healthy food and criticize unhealthy food. So really, you know, the Instagram followers, the TikTok followers, the people who have millions of followers, find those people. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is to work with journalists, young people working with journalists. I used to work with this group in the UK. You heard of Jamie Oliver, the chef. Jamie Oliver is big in the UK. And I used to work with his charity. And it's a very youth-driven charity, and they would organize, they would do undercover pieces of work. They would look at, there was this one thing they did on triple fried chicken. Sounds really scary, triple fried chicken. And they did a piece of work that showed that basically the food companies are trying really to fool young people. And young people in Britain feel like they can't trust the food companies anymore. So I think young people working with them is really important. I think also in terms of carrots, I'm thinking of our work in Ethiopia, Gaines' work. In Ethiopia, the government has set up these very big industrial estates around the big cities, and they're producing goods for export. And we've said to the government, you should think about reducing for, and they employ 50,000, 100,000 people, each one of these industrial estates. Think about giving companies that are producing nutritious food and supplying it to these 100,000 workers in these 20 industrial estates around the country. Think about giving those food companies lower utility bills, lower rental rates, lower electricity, lower water rates, preferential treatment to encourage healthy food production and discourage unhealthy food production. I think the final thing I would say is civil society can do a lot if it's organized. They should say civil society, your job is to educate, inform, and organize. And often we think about civil society as the informing bit and the educating bit, but not the organizing bit. So what are they called? Where everyone signs a pledge. I forgot what they call it, a petition. Petitions are very powerful. Again, in some of the countries we've worked in, civil society will organize petitions that say, we are very unhappy with the sale of these highly processed foods to our young people, and they'll have a piece of evidence. You've heard of the ATNI index, Access to Nutrition Index. I think they've done some work in Indonesia. They'll look at the Indonesian food companies. They'll go through all the products, all the brands that the food companies in Indonesia produce, and they'll rate them. They'll say, they'll go through thousands of brands and they'll say, are they greater than 3.5 out of 5 on the Health Star rating? And maybe you heard of the Health Star rating. It's a way of rating foods, processed foods. 5 is the healthiest, 0 is the unhealthiest. They went through, they rated all the brands that the Indonesian companies produced, and they found that only 1/3 of all the brands met the healthy threshold. And some companies were much higher, much lower than 1/3. Some companies only produced 10% of their brands were healthy. So again, you can organize petitions to say to this company, only 10% of your products are healthy. We expect more. Now I realize that's difficult to do in some countries, in some contexts. Citizen action is more difficult than in others. But again, I think there's a number of ways of thinking about this is a problem. It needs regulation. It needs regulation to negatively incentivize. It needs regulation to positively incentivize. But it's not only about governments. It's about youth. It's about civil society. It's about researchers. You as researchers, you can do surveys of what different companies are providing. You can look at labels and analyze the labels. You can also do this. Your researchers are very important. Don't think of yourselves as passive bystanders. You are active. You should be activists. You should be science-driven, always, evidence-driven. You can be active. You can act on the evidence. You can bring the evidence to life. Talk to a journalist. Talk to civil society groups. Talk to influencers. Think about people who can make things happen, and you give them the ammunition they need. Long answer, sorry. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. If you look at the profile of Indonesia's food system, it's weakest when it comes to it's weakest when it comes to the diversity of the supply chain, which goes back to your question. It's quite weak. It's a heavy reliance on a small number of crops. And it makes sense from a hunger perspective, but it doesn't really, it makes sense from a feeding people perspective. It makes less sense from a nourishing people perspective. The environmental aspects are quite strong, actually, but could be stronger on biodiversity. And then I think the whole area of highly processed foods is a vulnerability. I think regulation is very slow, but it's not just Indonesia, it's everywhere. Regulation is very slow to catch up, and the private sector is very powerful in stopping legislation from coming through. So, but when I think of Indonesia, I think of a very strong civil society. I think of a very strong legal set of experts, and I think you need to get in America, they call them class action lawsuits, where groups of citizens get together and take out a lawsuit against a company. That worked very well in the tobacco wars. And that could be something that is also happening, could happen here. And in terms of, but you have to take the data at a slightly grain of salt, because there is no Indonesian food system. There are thousands of Indonesian food systems, right? So parts of the country will have very good food systems and parts will not have very good food systems. So one of the big advantages Indonesia has as a big country is that you have lots of regencies and cities, 514, right? You can find the regencies and cities that where the nutrition indicators seem to be moving in the right direction, and figure out what are they doing? What's their government doing? What are their scientists doing? What are the businesses doing? What's the regulation? How are they doing something good? Whereas this regency or city is really struggling. So I think you have Indonesia is a laboratory for public policy, because there are so many different units and they each have some autonomy about what they do. So you must make the most of that opportunity.
Yeah, is it Ai? Yeah, okay, Ai from our alumni of doctorate program. Okay, Ai, we have a mic there.
Thank you, Dr. Rina. Good morning, Lawrence. It's very tempting presentation this morning, and you highlight a very crucial our nutrition problem, public health problem. From your presentation, that I highlighted that several public health issues you put in our country prior to pandemic, before the pandemic. It was anemia, maybe only breastfeeding on course, while the rest of the problem was there. I would like to ask your opinion during this pandemic. Well, some experts that said that the malnutrition the trajectory might increase 30%, while the problem was already there prior to pandemic. Last year, some of us involved in nutritional status survey from the government, from the Ministry of Health, and we found that the trend for the stunting was decreased. Last year, it was around 24.4%. But yeah, it's only stunting. We don't did the assessment on the other public health issues. I would like to ask from your expert opinion during this pandemic, while the pandemic is not over yet and the problem was still there, in your expert opinion, how would we manage this pandemic while and to overcome this malnutrition issue? Because in Indonesia, there is uneven distribution of food source. Maybe some areas has rich in the protein source, like the eastern part of Indonesia, but the other area was not available with the source of protein. I think that's one of the crucial issue that we should put to our government, how to distribute this source of food evenly in the region. Thank you.
Thank you. Really good question. So what did COVID-19 do to nutrition? It has three roots, three ways in which malnutrition suffered because of COVID. One was the health system became overwhelmed. And so a lot of nutrition programs are delivered through the health system, right? Vitamin A capsule distribution, iron folate distribution for pregnant women, diarrhea prevention, diarrhea treatment. All of these things are delivered through the health system. So the health system got overwhelmed with COVID-19 and couldn't deliver those programs. The food system got disrupted because of lockdowns. We couldn't move food from the farm to the market. So there'll be a lot of food over here, not enough food over here. And then in between, a lot of the food would get spoiled because it wouldn't be stored properly or transported properly. And the third route was income. A lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of people couldn't work. They couldn't get income. And so if you don't have income, it makes it just much harder to keep your kids well nourished. So there were these three routes. And how do you preserve nutrition in COVID-19? We as an organization, we faced this challenge and we thought, what can we do to keep, as I think you said, keep the nutritious food especially flowing to where it needs to be. So we did four things. First thing we said was too many food markets are shutting down because of COVID. COVID protocols were not in place. So governments or vendors would just shut down, or vendor associations would shut the markets down. So people couldn't get access to food. So with WHO, we developed protocols for keeping food markets open during COVID. Second thing we did was we said small and medium enterprises that are so important for nutritious food for low-income populations, they don't have operating capital that can help them through a crisis. Big companies have reserves of finance they can use, they can draw down to get them through a crisis. Small companies don't have that. So we set up a series of small grants to small companies. Third thing we did was to look at the workers, because primary healthcare workers are frontline workers, but food system workers are also really important for nutrition. If food system workers get sick, the food can't move around. So we had to protect food system workers. And the fourth thing, which I think gets mainly to your question, was we saw a social protection program social security programs, the coverage go like this. They went up hugely. That was most governments' response to COVID-19 was to increase social security coverage. But very few of those social security programs, those cash transfer programs, linked into nutritious foods. So you could have designed those programs. We give this low-income family this amount of food. You could have linked this amount of cash. You could have linked that to stimulating the production of nutritious food in that area, or stimulating the consumption of nutritious food in that area, because people now have more income. You could use that, you could leverage that, but that didn't happen. That was the one area that we tried to work with governments on, and we couldn't get governments to change the way they designed social protection programs. I think the final thing I would say is, COVID-19, it hasn't gone away. There will be waves of this again, and we need to place nutrition as part of a core package of responses to COVID-19, because we don't know yet whether good nutrition prevents COVID-19 or makes the symptoms less severe. We don't know, but we do know that good nutrition prevents obesity, which is a comorbidity of COVID-19. We do know that good nutrition prevents other infectious diseases, which are also comorbidities of COVID-19. So good nutrition is important for managing COVID-19, and we need to somehow get that as part of the package, the everyday package of responses that the government puts in. So again, nutrition is about reaching into other sectors, reaching into the COVID-19 world and saying, you need nutrition. You may not think you do, but you do, and making the case.
Yeah, thank you, Lawrence. We actually have a lot of questions from the audience, from the online, but perhaps we can take up one more question, last questions from the online. So David, could you share with us? Yeah. So from Fadila Amelia from Karolinska Institute, Sweden. Yeah, so it goes everywhere, yeah. So in the context of Indonesia, what is the best strategy to tackle undernutrition, stunting and wasting, while ensuring environmentally responsibly food system? As we know that animal-based protein, example from fish and meats, are still be encouraged to consume. At the same time, it produces higher greenhouse gas emission. How to balance this way of consumption, or which one to prioritize? Very, very good question.
Yeah, good question. Good question, difficult question. The first thing I would say is that there's far too little nuance in this area. You have people who say, just stop eating animal source foods. It's terrible for the environment. Then there are people who say, actually, animal source foods are the best source of micronutrients, bioavailable micronutrients. So, they're both right. But that doesn't mean we do this or we do this. We have to find a middle way. So the way we look at it at GAIN, and the way I look at it as an individual, is that where animal source food consumption for those population subgroups, where it's higher than the dietary guidelines, then it needs to come down. It needs to come down for health reasons. Bringing it down for health reasons will have a positive environmental impact, but only where it's high. Second, there are some groups of the population that don't eat enough animal source foods, very young children. UNICEF's recommendations, if you look at UNICEF recommendation, they say not enough young children are eating enough animal source foods. And that's because plant-based micronutrients, plant-based nutrients are very heavy for very young stomachs and guts that don't have lots of villi that are very well developed. So very young infants can't digest lots of plant-based products. They need animal source foods. So that recommendation is also right. vulnerable groups, like young children that need lots of nutrients and can't absorb it, they need access to affordable animal source foods. I would say the same for adolescent girls as well. Very high nutrient requirements. They need a certain level. So where recommended intakes are below minimum level, they need to be up. Where intakes are above maximum level, they need to come down. Now, all of that is on a health basis. Now, there are benefits environmentally, but you remember that graph I showed you before about greenhouse gas emissions? Yes, animal source foods are particularly heavy on greenhouse gas emissions, but other kinds of foods are heavier than animal source foods on water use, on the nitrogen cycle, on the potassium cycle, on land use, on biodiversity. So it's just not simple. It's not simple. And then to make it even more complex, some animal source foods are much more nutritious than others. And some animal source foods are much more environmentally destructive than others. And to make it even more complex, for the same animal source food, different production methods have different environmental consequences. So what am I saying here? It's very tempting to frame it that way, but that's the wrong framing. It's too simplistic. And the final thing I would say is that scientists are going to be the ones that help us navigate this really complicated space. For this subgroup in this region, what foods are most nutritional and have the lowest environmental footprint and are most affordable? That's the food I'm interested in as a government in promoting in this regency. This is the malnutrition profile. These are the foods that are available. These are the nutritious foods. These are affordable. These have the lowest environmental footprint. That's what I'm going to emphasize. So it's really, and then another complexity I would throw in is different types of animal source foods have different livelihood consequences as well. A lot of people depend on animal source foods for their livelihoods. That's another complication. So this whole animal source foods are bad for the environment, it's too simplistic. Animal source foods are bad for health, it's too simplistic. Animal source foods are good for health, it's too simplistic. Animal source foods are good for the environment, too simplistic. They're all wrong, but the truth is somewhere in the middle. And you need to, and the truth looks different in every context. So it's a really difficult challenge. That's why we're working on Eat Lancet. And the Eat Lancet work is we're really struggling, I would say, with that, because we want to come up with a diet that is universal in terms of its nutrient profile, but there are thousands of different ways to get to that diet. That's the thing we're struggling with. How do you come up with something that's a universal aspiration in terms of nutrients, but looks very different in the context? Because food is deeply cultural. So how do we find something culturally appropriate, economically appropriate, and nutritionally appropriate, and environmentally appropriate? So food systems creates lots of opportunity for action, but lots of complexity in terms of what we're trying to achieve. My final point, Rena, is when I joined GAIN, we were developing a new strategy in 2017. And one of my staff members said, what about environment? You know, we're a nutrition organization, but we should be doing stuff on environment. And I said, look, we can't, you know, it's difficult enough to move in nutrition. Let's not worry about nutrition. Let's not worry about environment. Let's just do nutrition. But, you know, 3 or 4 years later, I just realized that was wrong. That was a wrong assessment of mine. We need to pay attention to environment because of environment, but also I think it's a way to help us advance nutrition as well. All of these things are interconnected, and we can't just divide the world up anymore. The 21st century is about complex things that require alliances of different disciplines and different stakeholders. It's not the 20th century made us think, most of you weren't alive in the 20th century, but the 20th century made us think everything was could be neatly compartmentalized. That's not the way the world works. Back to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Lawrence. I think we have a lot of insight coming from your explanation. There's a lot of questions still online, and I believe some of you here, we can compile that questions and give it to you, and perhaps some other time they could still have some interaction with you. Maybe as a take-home message that you bring in, will repeat that, and I think that would be, for me, it's very very important and very insightful. So we face a very what we call it as a broken food system. Let's say current food system is bad, not only our human health but also for the planet, for our environment. It's not simply that we can do just one thing. We need to do a lot of things, and that's why maybe GAIN put as an alliance, because also put a lot of efforts together and brings also the sequence and technical sounds, political, administrative, in environment, community, and all this put it together in an integrative way. So we learn this pathway. It might actually be goal of pathway in Indonesia, could be enlarged more, could actually enhance more, especially for the young. You get insight, a lot of idea on how you can contribute to transformation of the system. So thank you very much, Dr. Lawrence, for your lecture today, and for all the answer to our audience, and also to the, not only to the young, but we also have some lectures, we also have some audience from many different countries as well. So I believe this is very helpful and very important issue raised from you. Okay, you would like to say something
No,
before?
just, it was my pleasure to do this. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And thank you for really good questions. I mean that. They were excellent questions and they made me think hard. So I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
And you mentioned that we need to work together, right? And government cannot do their own. We need to all work together. So mean that transformation of the system is responsibility of all of us. Yeah. Okay, that's
Every one of you can make a difference.
Yeah.
You make lots of food choices every day. All of you. Just be mindful of the food choices you make.
Yeah, we can start from our own. Yeah, starting to have a healthy food today. Okay, so give applause one more time to Professor. So I will then give the floor to the master ceremony, Nadine. She's one of our international student for medical faculty. Will continue her study in UK, yeah, for the program. We have here the program medical students international having the school here plus UK or Australia.
Where in the UK?
Newcastle University, Doc.
Okay, over to you, Nadine.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rina. Thank you very much, Dr. Lawrence. Please give one more round of applause for the both of them. We would also like to welcome Prof. Aryono, KPSS 3 Gizi. Thank you for attending our event today. Maybe to commemorate your attendance, and also Dr. Lawrence and Dr. Rina, we can take a picture for Prof. Aryono, Prof. Dr. Lawrence, and Dr. Rina. You may come to the front for a photo session.
What hands good to be.
Sini kayaknya.
Thank you very much for the committee for the photo session, for Prof. Areno, Dr. Lawrence, Dr. Rina. You may sit back in your seats. The question and answer session marks the end of today's international guest lecture. We would like to thank all participants for attending today's event, from the online participants or for our offline participants today, and extend again the greatest gratitude to our guest lecturer, Dr. Lawrence Haddad, and Dr. Rina Agustina as our moderator for the guest lecture. As your master of ceremony, on behalf of the committee of this program, we beg your pardon of the mistake we have made. Certifications for this event will be distributed after our event through your emails. To make sure you receive your e-certificates, please do fill in the evaluation form and the presents link over here in the screen. Once more, as the master of ceremony, I would like to say thank you very much for attending today's event. We hope to see you in our next event. Have a very good day. Thank you very much, everyone.